What is going on? Welcome back to Jiu-Jitsu Outlet. I'm sitting down with one of my favorite YouTubers in the world, Mr. Chadi. How are you doing, man?
Hello, Paul. Thank you so much. It's Chadi. The CH is a French um, pronunciation, so it's Chadi.
Oh, dude, I've been following your channel for like 2 years now, and I just learned that. I was today
I,
when I
I literally say my name is in every video.
I know. I know. Sorry, man. Shaddy.
It's okay.
I know
Yeah.
you do. That's crazy. But dude,
I mean, I know the word Chad is a very positive word in the Western Hemisphere, but it's still not my name.
Shaddy. Well, I know all about that. I've got a weird last name myself. So, dude, I appreciate you coming on the show. I know you've been on the podcast before, back before we were on YouTube, and you shared about how judo has helped your mental health and your life off the mats. So, if you're listening to this and you want to check that out, I'll put a link in the description. So, but today we're going to talk about something a little different, man. We're going to go in a different direction. I wanted to ask you about the history of grappling. I know this is something that you're deep in the waters with, man. This is what your channel is all about. And I just wanted to ask, like, what have been some of your biggest takeaways in the last year from doing research into the history of the martial arts, the history of jiu-jitsu, the history of judo, all this stuff? Like, what have been some of the big things that you've looked at and been like, man, this just changes my whole perspective on the martial arts?
The I'll give you two takes. The first one, I'm not gonna dive too deep into it because it's not really that important at the moment. The first one being is no matter how much you think you figured it out, either there's a lot more that you have to learn, or you can be completely wrong, even though the pictures might seem incredibly clear to you. You can always be wrong. That's one. Two, we often say nothing new under the sun. You heard this a million times already, and I don't think people quite understand the extent or the gravity of this statement. Let's talk about something I've been working on recently. So, um, your channel is going to be the first to actually have this announcement on. So, I'll be coming out with a translated work. It's from Meiji 36, meaning 1903. It's called The Origins and History of Judo. Now, 1903, at the time, Judo was 21 years old, I believe. So not that much has happened except the big fight when they were trying to prove themselves in Tokyo, meaning they were the one to teach the police. But um, the author, mainly Ryohei Uchida, which was a very interesting character, I should say. I'll get to him a little bit later, but he talks more about the roots and origins of judo, very much so like today when we are discussing judo in the context of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or the groundwork or the katamewaza, the controlling technique in the context of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You have people making massive claims and they're very easy to grasp simply because of the like how easy it is to understand that idea. For example, Maeda went to Brazil and he saw two not very strong boys who were looking to defend themselves, and then they've grasped it and they've turned it into this beautiful system that from judo, which is mostly about throwing, into this massive ground game with that can beat any martial art. While the simple reality, it's not actually simple. It's far more complex, and also it's just in many aspects is simply false. So Ryohei Uchida, the author, discusses these things. For example, jujitsu techniques, old jujitsu techniques actually come from China. I still find this claim in my comments, actually. You have like a bunch of theories, but one of them being that the Chinese, with their dynasties and their rich history, they had those techniques and then they've arrived to Japan, much like the Japanese characters, the kanji. They've been integrated, or before it was only kanji, and then later you had the katakana and hiragana and a bunch of other things. I'm not a linguist. I'm not going to talk too much about the evolution of the Japanese language, but Jiu-Jitsu wise, it's all the techniques came from there. It was through the guy Cheng Wanping, and then now it developed into Jiu-Jitsu. Very similar to what you hear about Gracie and Judo. And then the author spends an extensive amount of time referencing books, quoting people, quoting Kano himself, quoting Chen Wanping himself, saying, I would like to learn the Toride and the rod and the things, meaning that he actually came to the land of Japan and actually picked up a few things and then came back and said, I invented these things, or look what I've got with me, and to make things easy, people are like, okay, he went there, he gave it to them. While in fact, that's not the case. He debates extensively on for the ingenuity of the Japanese people and how they came up with these techniques. Another thing that he later goes through is sumo and how it separates from jiu-jitsu, which later became judo. And what's interesting about that book is that it's from 1903, and he's using the only judo. So using the word judo. So this, and also, there's a chapter just for the name of judo, and he explains why he's using it. And it's a bit weird because he's saying the various founders of the schools of judo, and you're like, huh? And then he's naming jujutsu schools like the Kitoryu, the stuff that we all know, and he's using judo, the term, and it's a bit weird, but it's just how you come to terms with those labels, and so it's a path to them. So you can say jujutsu, judo, they are somewhat interchangeable, but the idea that it was far more like that's another myth, or what's the word, narrative that we often hear, that at the turn of the century it was all still jujitsu, counter jujitsu. While it is true, but the term judo had its full weight at the time. Not only him, but also Tomita mentioned it I believe it was in New York. He made a big speech about it around the year 1905, I believe, somewhere in that time period. And another thing to go back to the subject, another thing that Uchida discusses is how things evolved because of rules. So, for example, sumo, which is like you see like a big clash, and then the first one to touch the ground, he's finished, because in a battlefield, everyone's clashing into each other. You finish them off. Also, they were wearing armor. They cannot get up the same way. They cannot move. So that's why you have the open palms pushing each other, not so much like this. But with the ring, now it's very limited movement. The techniques are not as sophisticated, or as they haven't caught up with what we have now, simply because of this. And that's why the need for something like judo. And also he talks about too much rules and affecting the technique. And now we often talk about this as well. So a lot of the hot topics of martial arts, they were present 200 years ago, centuries ago. And I found that very interesting to see it. And this still using the same methodology, referencing books, quoting that person, also talking about safety and self-defense, and how to evolve an art. And it just reaffirmed what I confirmed. I don't know, sorry for my English, but just confirmed that my approach is very healthy towards judo. And academics have been doing that. Kano there's a big quote of Kano in that, it's a few pages long, in that book, talking about this, like the old grappling with the armor in the past. It's not as refined as today's judo, so no, it is the ingenuity of the Japanese people. It's quite interesting. So when it comes to the history of grappling, know that these topics will always revolve around these things. So another theory, it's not in the book, but it's also something else I get. Like the Chinese comment, I still get it till this day. He was debating it in 1903. So another one is you had, what was it? You had, I, I don't know where they get these claims from. You had Alexander the Great taking Greek wrestling and pancration with him to India, and then the Indians gave it to the Chinese, and then the Chinese gave it to. It's like only one person can come up with this set of techniques. It's ridiculous.
Of course.
Think about it, right?
Yeah.
Even when I was 12, I was watching the Olympics and I was watching WWE, and I was thinking about the human body and trying to come up with these ideas.
Yep.
And then later you find out they're out there. I mean, imagine people who actually had access to facility and time for training and trial and error. Imagine the stuff they will come up with. So that's one thing. So things like De La Riva guard, or I don't know, just it's crazy that that our historical perception goes back only a few decades ago. If I'm not mistaken, I believe De La Riva himself said, I developed this to beat Hoyler because he was undefeated at the time. I might be mistaken. Don't quote me on this, but you see that, and now people just they see the name on something. Oh, he invented it. Well,
Right.
And again, going back to Uchida, he says people will give names to various techniques or a variation of technique, and people will immediately jump to the conclusion that said guy invented this technique or whatever.
Right.
And it's
not
still, it's like you're reading a book from now almost, and that's the crazy part. Like even in the Japanese nomenclature, you will still have this. Sometimes I reference sukuinage,
right,
which is when you grab like either both legs or one leg with the sleeve or the lapel, and you scoop up and you slam. So like or a double leg where you lift, like really scoop up and then slam down. Not the one where you just reap the leg and you just dive down. No,
right.
like a massive pickup and you slam.
Yeah.
And it's called sukuinage in the Kodokan list. Is something going on there? Is something going on there?
No. What?
Like you've seen I don't know. I thought maybe something's maybe up.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, good. So I say sukuinage, but in the West, and even Mifune called it teguruma, or hand wheel, because with your hand wheel. And 2 days ago, I get a comment. This is clearly teguruma. Like it's right in front of you. I can't even believe you even call it sukuinage. What? So imagine now with the helicopter spin into sniper's nest, onto the mission control, into wrist lock motion. I don't know, these like weird, funny names that you see in jiu-jitsu. And it's very easy to just jump into conclusions. While even back in the past, like Osotogari, the big outer reap. In the past, you find old jiu-jitsu books calling it Mataharai, which is thigh sweep, or what is it? The armbar. The armbar was just ude shigi or ude hishigi, which is arm breaking or arm crushing. Now they added the jushi gatame, like the form of 10, the character 10, or like ji is the character and ju is 10.
Yeah.
So that's why. So it looks like a 10 cross shape, and then the hold. They all became ude hishigi because you crush the arm, but then you add the shape of it, like sankaku gatame or ashi gatame or whatever it is. So even within the Japanese world, the techniques have taken on different names, and in jiu-jitsu, it's even crazier now. So it's quite interesting that we're just spinning in a hamster wheel in many aspects.
Man, that's so well said. Something that you really reminded me of was the first time that I ever learned the lockdown was at judo class when I was like 19, and my judo coach was showing the lockdown. And it's exactly the way that you see it in the 10th planet system that Eddie Bravo supposedly invented himself. But I think a lot of times people mistake developing and invention as the same thing. He certainly developed the system more, but he didn't invent that move. It's been being done in judo for a long time. And it was introduced to me as a judo move that you do to prevent the person from getting your shoulders to the mat, because that's how they would score, and how they could pin you. So he was showing exactly what Eddie Bravo does, where you use it to secure the leg, you pull it back, and then you're able to hop up to your knees and get to turtle. And then you can prevent the pin, basically, and whatnot. And that was my first introduction to it. And then years later, I saw it through jiu-jitsu when I started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it was introduced to me as this invention of Eddie Bravo. And I was like, no, it's not. Like, we learned this at judo it's in the judo curriculum, and that's just one example of many. Like, there's so many like that, literally pretty much the entire thing. Like, you're talking about De La Riva guard. De La Riva certainly developed it more, but did he invent it? No. It's the same thing with the heel hook. Did John Danaher invent the heel hook? No. But
people are saying that.
No, they're not. But I'm just using that as an example. Like, I get
there's video of Elio Gracie and the gi doing it. It's funny.
I'm just using that as an example. It would be like saying he invented the heel hook, but really he certainly developed the heel hook for sure. But no one would say he developed it. So we should say, or that he invented it, So we should look at all of these moves in that same light. Like, no one is inventing moves. You might develop it more, but all of the stuff, like you said, and like King Solomon said in the Bible, there's nothing new under the sun. That's ancient wisdom.
Speaking of the Bible, one of my favorite quotes, it's actually a scholar, I think it was in the early 20th century. He said it in reference to the Bible, obviously, but this can also work a lot in martial arts with the Japanese and the Brazilian, like all the Portuguese, sorry, with all the languages that we're dealing with. He said, I think it was Chaim Nachman. I'm sorry, and if I butcher his name, but he said, reading the Bible in a translated language, something like that, it's like kissing your wife through her veil.
Yeah, so, there's a lot that gets lost in translation.
Right. So even now, with Japanese, like, you can understand what's happening, but you don't really understand what's happening. Kuzushi, one example is people will just say, "Oh, unbalancing," but if you look at the word in and of itself, it's like something that's like collapsed, and it just drives the point like further. If you look at it from the point of it collapsed, you collapse their composure, their posture, their mental state, and now they're ready to be thrown, or swept or whatever.
Really, I never knew that.
Yeah, you see that unbalancing, it's barely scratching the surface.
Wow, man, that's the first time.
It's not wrong, but like sometimes you can do the same entry for the technique. The guy is just sending normal. You will barely phase him, but if he has his shoulders crunched in and he's like this, and then you do this exact same thing, he will be sent off flying. So it really shows, like, yes, he is collapsed. Man,
that's fascinating. I didn't know that until today. Man, I've been learning a lot of things today through this chat. But dude, I wanted to ask you one more thing. You actually just brought up the Bible, and I feel like that's a good segue into this. You introduced me to Dr. Roddy Ferguson a while back, and he's been on the show now 2 times, once to share his story and once to talk about how judo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are basically the same martial art. If you're listening to this, I'll put a link to it somewhere in the screen or down below. But in that conversation, Dr. Ferguson brought up that the Bible actually is one of the oldest recorded stories of submission grappling, where in the book of Genesis, Jacob, it talks about Jacob wrestling God. And it is this story in the first book of the Bible. And in the wrestling match, God puts Jacob into a hip lock and he gets him to submit. And he taps him out, basically. And that's the story, is they have a wrestling match. And obviously, who knows if this is a actual real life event or if it's an allegorical story. I mean, that's getting into discussing the etymology of religion. But Dr. Ferguson's point was that it doesn't matter if you believe in the Bible or not. That's an account of submission grappling from thousands and thousands of years ago. So could we talk a little bit about that? Like, is there anything else you're aware of like that from ancient history where there's some account of submission grappling, whether it's in a throwing scenario or submissions or anything like that?
I'll this one I'm not going to talk about it too much because first I have to go back and read it again. Not only that, but also go back to the Hebrew text and decipher it bit by bit because I would genuinely like to extract everything I can from it. You said ancient texts, yeah. I think it was either I think it's the Nihongi. It's also referenced in Uchida's book. He talks about sumo and how it came to be, and it was a death match, and he crushed him, and he was so it wasn't like the just pushing off the dohyo or the ring, but it was a genuine death match. It was, uh, it's like Takemi no Kata. It's it's a legend. So, but still, they had death matches from thousands of years ago, talking about it and grappling and throwing each other to the ground and fighting. So, I wouldn't. I'm not surprised. Another one is, I believe, it was a Mongolian. I forgot who it was, but also saying he put him in a spine lock, breaking his spine and killing him after he threw him down. So there's a lot. There's quite a.
I went to a Dean Lister seminar once, and he was talking about this topic of how like no one really knows where these moves actually came from. And he brought up that he was traveling in Syria, I guess, and he went to, I guess, ancient Mesopotamia, where Mesopotamia used to be. And there was a museum that he visited. And again, this is just Dean Lister talking at a seminar. I have not seen a photo. He didn't have one. It's just pure story. But he said he saw a statue from like 6,000 years ago of someone in an omoplata. This dude had the other guy in a straight up omoplata. And of course, we think of omoplata as something that came from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But here it is. I mean, of course, assuming Dean's story checks out, here it is in ancient Mesopotamia, which is one of the oldest civilizations ever. You know, so this is something I think about a lot, man, is just where did this stuff all come from? And I mean, we might have to get a little bit into conjecture here because the sources, I feel like there's not a whole lot about how did these moves get developed? Like, what do you think about that? Do you think that it kind of evolved naturally? Is this just just something that
Yeah,
humans are meant to figure out?
like even just teenagers grappling, they know how the body bends, etc. They're eventually with a lot of trial and error, like I mentioned earlier, with the whole China going from like Alexander the Great dragged it all the way to India, and then like it's trial and error, people fighting. A lot of cultures are wrestling cultures by by design, especially in the Caucasus, in Asia. Um, there's just there's no way you're gonna come to that conclusion. Uh, I think of it also the same like cuisines. If you go to the Levant, like Syria, Lebanon, all these Middle East, like on the Mediterranean part, they have dumpling soups, or it can, or like a dumpling stew. Um, then you go to Russia. They also have dumpling soup. They make it, but and then of course the southeast they have a lot of dumplings, and then they're in broth or soup. So you're gonna tell me one guy came up with it and just went and giving the good word about dumpling soup and how good is it? No, they they just came up with some ways, but they're all different. Like, it's all dumpling soup or dumpling broth or dumpling whatever, and then they all made differently. Either you make it with a different type of dough, or the filling type, a different type of meat, or some they're cooked in yogurt, while some they're cooked in vegetable stock. You see, but at the end, it's still vegetable. Sorry, it is still. I was going to say vegetable broth. It's still dumpling soup. So uh, that's just one example. You have also the skewers. You have punch. So coming out with the same throws, or you see same throws in this set culture or set culture, it shouldn't be that surprising. However, how they came to it is the interesting part, because that's where they truly differ. I'll give you an example. Like we've seen the kimono before it became the gi, so they double layered it so it doesn't rip quickly, and then later Kano with the rice grain and kusakura, it became the gi that we know today, because it ensures longevity, and also it's long so they don't burn themselves, or the quality of the mats they had back then, even today. So you see the throws and what was that? You see the throws and how they pull and unbalance someone or sweep them as they are moving because of your movement. Look up street fights on YouTube. The first things a lot of guys do is take off their shirt instinctively.
It's true.
So
It's true.
yeah, so pulling someone like this and then moving them and then sweeping their leg as they're moving. That's, for example, with the undergarments of the Japanese that later became the what we now use as the judo gi. In Inner Mongolia, they have this thick, they call it jatak, like the leather jacket. They learned the movement and how to feel it and how to, drive a far bigger opponent away from you and sweeping them and falling like nothing. You have countless footage of Mongolian wrestling in grassland. Like one wrestler is like this big and the other one is like this big, and he's sweeping him away. And they've learned that through their herding culture, like how for example, anticipate a horse trying to resist that way so they can actually use that momentum to get them moving or circulate, go to the area where there's least resistance, and then they could drive it. But they came up with this foot sweep the same way, like you see the okuri ashi harai in judo or jiu-jitsu. But it's how they came to it that's interesting. I don't think at this point in time we should be very surprised. Oh wow, they share these techniques. It was just gonna happen. The human body is the same everywhere. Like I said, in the 1903 book, he's talking about you can find techniques everywhere, similar, but they somehow have little differences. And in my opinion, the cultural aspect of the martial art, or how they came to that conclusion, which is the foot sweep, or maybe the hip toss, or the arm locks or pins, is the interesting part, not the technique itself. Sure, you want to know how they came up with it, but through understanding of the physics and the mechanics of the body, we know why it works. So we don't really need to understand, oh, why did he invent that? But how they came to it, or the reasoning, it can differ from place to place, and that's, in my opinion, far more interesting.
Another question I had for you, man, something that we talk about a lot on this show is how jiu-jitsu and how judo and wrestling, how they actually help your life off the mats. And
Yeah.
we get into this kind of discussion around the other side of it, almost more the esoteric personal development side of the martial art. And I wanted to ask you this, is that a relatively new concept, the idea of doing these things for personal development, or has that always been a part of it? Because obviously these things were developed to kill people in war, right? But how has it always been that it was associated with kind of becoming a better person and discipline and health and all this stuff? Or is that a relatively modern invention?
Um, I can tell you now the judo standpoint or the historical context from it. Uh, I don't think, or I don't see any like relationship between human virtue or uh, like developing values through this practice prior to Jigoro Kano, because you have also the guy Herbert Spencer. He talks about three types of education: physical. I'm sure Drysdale mentioned this to you. Physical, moral, and intellectual. So Kano said, you know, the main goal or the ultimate goal at the end is to contribute positively to society. So anything you want to do in this life, whether you want to be a teacher, whether you want to help people, you want to be a philanthropist, in if you look at it from any angle, you would realize that it really has to do with filling myself up fully in order to pour out, kind of like a big wine vessel. Like you're not gonna give anyone a good time if you're empty, right? And Kano said you have three levels of judo. The first one being the physical training to defend yourself, physical activity, etc. The second one being where you start to incorporate more of the mind, where you look at others, what they're doing. Like sometimes how many footage do we study a day? All of us. So, and also listening to your teachers, see what they're doing. And then finally, the ultimate goal is to give back to society. So you see, you have to acquire skills, training, tougher body, etc. Then you learn from others to acquire more intellectual knowledge, not necessarily just coaching and competitors. And then when you have both of these, it's time to activate the moral part, which is give back to society. So even in his letter to Koizumi, which is a very important piece of history, in my opinion, because it talks about not only how the Olympics will ruin judo, at his time he said that, or indirectly he said that, but also he said to him that if it becomes solely sport and solely competitive, and if we take the sparring part or the randori part and focus solely on that in order to make it a sport, to put it in the Olympics, we would be doing nothing but going back to a form of struggle that it was jiu-jitsu back before Kodokan. So I don't think that whole thing, maybe they knew, they kind of figured out, like even bodybuilders, they talk about, I'm a stronger person. I developed a seven-figure business because I started lifting weights. Or, I mean, you're just starting to just like everything, like learning a language. It's all input, 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 and then at the output comes. You have to practice your speech and whatever, but it's all input. You listen, you read, you learn grammar, etc. It's someone who discovered the gym realized they're starting to do these physical changes to themselves, which ultimately reflected to their positively on their attitude, because physical fitness and physical training does have mental benefits like improved sleep, and many others. And that alone, improved sleep can be very good for you, or less anxiety or whatever. And then, oh look, I can focus on my business, and then bodybuilding changed my life. Technically, I mean, yeah, it helped trigger something, but to really systemize that thing and talk about it, you don't see bodybuilders talking about making a better society. You see also a lot of like insecure and scam artists in bodybuilding. Like, buy my ebook and you look like me in this 8-week cycle, while he's pinning every drug under the sun. So you see, but to really how do you say, what's the encadrer, frame this intellectual and the moral training, not just the physical. I'm gonna say it's somewhat new. I don't know about other cultures or other philosophers, because I know philosophers talked about physical training, but the way that we talk about it, you and me, and also because we know that we have duty towards either our family or our community, I think Kano was quite revolutionary in that aspect.
I agree, man. My dog's singing a song about this conversation. But dude, I agree. Like, I haven't been able to find someone before Kano who really developed this as a personal development system, as the primary goal, if that makes sense. There's might be other times where that's kind of thrown in, but he really seems to be the person who recognized that we're now in a modern world where you don't necessarily need this to survive, if that makes sense. And I think that he began to see that if there wasn't this development of it into a sport or into something that could be practiced recreationally, then it might even disappear, or it might just stay with the military and not actually be percolated out for all of society, if that makes sense. Like, that's at least my impression from studying his work. And I haven't read all his books or anything like that. But that's my kind of impression from it, is that we give, and this is something Roddy Ferguson really influenced my thinking on too, is that we give the Gracie family a lot of credit, and they really need that. Like, they did a significant contribution to the martial arts, but Jigoro Kano really is the first person who said that we're going to take this martial thing and we're going to make it into something that average Joe can do. Like, he was the one who kind of, at least from what I can see, had that idea, and he had it almost 100 years before the Gracies. So could we talk a little bit more about that? Because I think there's a lot of people who get that confused. Could you talk a little bit more about that early day, back when judo was called Kano Jiu-Jitsu and it was first kind of becoming a thing? Could we talk a little bit about that? Because most people, especially jiu-jitsu people, they might have not even heard of Jigoro Kano.
Right. Even now, a lot of the times his name is omitted, and things have, like, or other people are being given credit to that. Like, I'll give an example, and that it just, I'm not gonna say it bothers me. It doesn't affect me, but it's just like, it's a shame. Let's just put it this way. Henry Gracie, he wears that rash guard. Like, here you have the American, and here is the Brazilian sleeve or whatever. And don't forget where you came from or something, or don't forget your roots or something. You're missing quite a big piece. Like, where's the Japanese part? Where are the teachings of Kano? And he does handle them, like the bullying, the protection, how to be kind to others, look at whenever something happens, he rushes to aid them. Sure, it's great marketing for his school, I'm sure, but also he has the good intentions. But I think you're missing the you're not seeing the giant that on which their shoulders you're standing on. You see, that's why I say it's a shame. Uh, I think also now you have to take into context the shift that was happening in Japanese society, is that the whole thing with samurai and the outdated stuff, and they just want to push and compete with the West. They want to really prove themselves. A lot of these items, they were, like, not items, but cultural aspects, I should say. They were being treated as like old and stuff that are, that should not serve them anymore. And Kano was like, whoa, 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 no. Like, he searched for jujitsu his whole life in order to defend himself. He was not a big guy. And he at the same time understood that this will make a better human being. And so he implemented it into education, and that's very important. And in my opinion, he did a great job also spreading Japanese culture too through it. Because think about it, a lot of us know, even if you don't know Japanese language, a lot of people, they bow, they do things because they love the martial art they're in. Either it's Aikido or karate or judo. They just do these little uh, cultural aspects of Japanese culture. Because they love the martial art. So in that sense, I think it helped put Japan on the map, and also preserve that very important aspect, because otherwise it would be gone. Imagine there's no judo, or no one kept it the way that Kano kept it, with all these books, with this nomenclature, and this brilliant system that he I just said the word, like, framed it so perfectly. Imagine all that is gone, or we barely have anything on it, like other jujitsu schools that you may find some type of uh, book on it in the National Jet Library of Japan, and you see like maybe 4 or 5 techniques. But I'm sure the arsenal was much bigger. So very happy that this happened. He kept it alive, and it grew so much since then. But again, let's not forget the giant that is Jigoro Kano, because without him, there is no Hoist Gracie, there is no UFC, there is no all this Gracie business that is happening. It would just simply not exist. I'm terribly sorry. With all due respect, it would just not exist. And he damn deserves the credits, Kano. And I think it's disrespectful for Henner to actually just omit it. And even like say my grandfather came up with the guard like Crone or whoever. I think it's very disrespectful. I say this like I'm trying to stay as objective as possible, but I do think it's disrespectful because like their name is not mentioned ever once, like Kano or Mifune or Kimura. Only when you talk about Kimura in the context of the Gracie fight, even though he's done way better fights, or it was a walk in the park that fight in the Maracana, but still, like the fact that they omitted, like you have the Valente brothers, they talk about Kano and Judo and Kodokan with so much fondness and respect, and yet they got their black belt from Elio. So I don't see why they're doing that in the other part, Hickson also. It's really a shame.
Yeah, I agree. It's either shows, like you're saying, kind of a intentional disrespect, or it shows ignorance of where they
Yeah.
came from. And those guys,
Unintentional disrespect through ignorance.
yeah, exactly. And those guys are super smart. I've been to a seminar with Henry Gracie. He actually, like, you know, politics aside, his jiu-jitsu is fantastic. Like, he really, the seminar I went with him was amazing. And he showed he's very smart. Henner is super, super intelligent, very articulate guy. So I would be shocked if he didn't know about Jigoro Kano. You know what I mean? Like, I guarantee you these guys know. They're smart as shit. You know, like they're very savvy guys. They're super, super intelligent. Like they're very articulate. They 100% know about Jigoro Kano and all of this stuff. And they absolutely could give him more respect. Should they or not? That's up for debate. I mean, I'm not here to judge someone. That's not something that I'm a big fan of doing, but I do definitely see what you're saying. And man, like I feel the same. I feel like you got to give that man some respect. Jigoro Kano, was a gangster. And the thing about him is he actually has an almost identical origin story as Elio Gracie. He was frail to an extent, like he wasn't a big guy. And from what I understand, I mean, you please feel free to correct me, but he sought out specifically the ground-based style because he understood that it gave him more leverage over a bigger opponent. This is something I've heard. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But from my perspective, again, on Jigoro Kano, I haven't read all of his stuff, but that's my impression, at least, is that he was not an athletic guy. He was an educator. Like he was a normal guy. He wasn't
however.
Well, is it true that he trained? Is it true he trained at a jiu-jitsu school that really specialized in the ground, or was it more?
Yes, Tenjin Shinryu had a phenomenal arsenal on the ground. They had the rear naked choke, the arm locks, and the pins that we use till this day. But he himself was not like Elio. Just take it to the ground, leverage, and then the guy, I can only beat him there. Like you see his fight against Kato, and like you see that there is a lot of emphasis on the ground more. I'm not saying Elio did not know how to throw. He was a judoka. You see his throws. There's a lot of videos of Elio actually doing some really nice throwing techniques. But Kano emphasized actually standing up as much as possible, self-defense wise. Even the bent over posture, he was against it because you tend to be very vulnerable to strikes and to go off balance. And so he really emphasized on a natural upright posture, more on standing up and nagewaza. He had a big feud with Tsunetane Oda because Oda, again, nothing is new. Oda in the 1910s, he was telling his students, take the fight to the ground, take the fight to the ground. At the time, there weren't as much rules as today. So guys just sat down, a lot of them. That's what his students did. And through crafting a lot of the groundwork, they were just able to beat the one-on-one fight. Just like now we say, Jiu-Jitsu is the best because I took him to the ground and there I did whatever I wanted to him. That was being done in the 1910s because of Oda. And he collected all the school trophies. He was telling his students, the high school students, to do this. He stayed, I believe, his team stayed the reigning champion for like 6 or 7 years. And Kano was really like irritated with that. He was like, hey, like the guys are sitting down. How do you think that's gonna work with multiple attackers or self-defense? Just again, all the debates all the arguments we're giving now, they've been done and over with, like wash, rinse, and repeat, but just through a different context of time. Like it was, the Chinese gave it up. Now it's, the Brazilians came up with the ground technique. Like it's like you have to prove like every other culture did not come up with it except Japanese ingenuity or whatever. And then later, because they knew the Kodokan curriculum needed to develop in some way, said, okay, go and do, you want to further your research in the groundwork, please do so. And then, like the Kodokan groundwork, it developed a bit. You had first with Tanabe, what happened, then you had guys like Hajime Isugai and Samura. They really worked on groundwork in order to not, for Tanabe to not be a threat anymore like he was. And then later you had Oda in the 1910s. And then in the 1920s, the De La Riva guard guy, Kanemitsu, worked more on things like triangle, knee bar, and so that was one of those things. So if you look at Oda's book called Thus Judo Wins, I believe. Yeah, Thus Judo Wins. I believe it was from the early 1920s. You see a lot of the classical pin, like the shoulder hold or the kesagatame or whatever, but there's a lot of stuff that are not techniques. For example, you see the double ankle sweep, you see these little things, the transitions. So it was working more around those because the arsenal had developed in terms of like the strangles, the arm locks, the pins, all those things existed, but it's just how you work around them. That's where things truly evolve, right? Because this is where the setup is. That's how you catch someone by surprise. Because let's say now you catch me with an arm lock. We're rolling and you catch me with an arm bar. Does that mean I've never seen an arm bar before? No, it just means you're better than me and you set it up in a way that I could not avoid it, right? So this, if you look at that book, the Thus Judo Wins, there's a lot of that stuff, like how to get to that position, how to do that. You see in the New Style of Judo by Kanemitsu in 1926, see the De La Riva, you see the knee on belly and how to get to the pin or whatever, and not just the submissions or not just the pin. So this idea that yes, Kano's Jiu-Jitsu school had good groundwork, but he himself was not like, yes, I want more groundwork. No, he knew that self-defense is more of standing upright. No, he was far more interested in how he handles himself standing up, because everything else was, I would say, if you can throw someone and handle them standing up, you're most likely gonna handle the situation when it goes to the ground. And he already knew pins and strangles and arm locks.
So, in other words, it sounds like he wanted to develop a certain level of competency on the ground, and he wanted to be competitive with the other schools at the time, but he favored getting on top and kind of imagining like strikes are involved and keeping that element of realism, which I think is super important too.
Yes, he kept the self-defense aspect in mind for sure.
Man, that's fascinating. I feel like I could talk about just that one thing for the whole day, but I wanted to ask you one more question. I know we're getting close to our end here, but something that's a bit of a pet peeve of mine is when people talk about mixed martial arts as this new thing, this new phenomena, this new sport. Like I was just talking, or not talking, I was listening to Dana White on the Lex Friedman podcast, which was a fantastic episode, by the way, for anyone who's listening to this. Fantastic episode. Dana White, I think is, I really admire a lot of what he's achieved. I really admire him as a person. But one thing he said in that interview, which kind of ticked me off, was he was talking about MMA as kind of a new evolution. Like this is something that has come out of having all these different martial arts fight each other. And honestly, from my perspective, it's kind of like what we were talking about at the beginning. It seems like a revival of the origin, because the origin is fighting. Right? At the end of the day, all of these things came out of how do I beat up another person without a weapon, basically. Or, you know, you add in weapons and now you have stuff like Eskrima or Arnis or the, you know, Aikido or stuff like that. But I guess what I'm saying is, my question to you, where do you feel like a lot of this stuff got started? Do you think that it almost started in that sort of primal origin and then we refined it? Or did it start off with different cultures developing different styles and then it all has come together here kind of in the present day? I mean, guess what I'm saying is, do you agree with me? Do you agree with Dana White? Do you have a different perspective? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
The truth is somewhere in between, in the sense that now with the UFC, sure, there is a lot of the development and evolution that's happening for sure. Is it perfect? I can't, nothing is perfect. But in terms of how do you mesh all these elements together, being mindful of the flying knee when you want to shoot on someone, or uh, how good is your guard when the guy is actually allowed to strike you. Sure, these things are very important. But to go back to the past with warfare, and not just warfare, after when there's supposedly good peace and people are just training and competing. So if you see all those kumiuchi reenactments and guys wearing samurai uh, armors, they get close, take the guy down, and after they lose their long weapon, whether it's the spear or the sword, and then you don't strike. Obviously, you just grab a little tanto and then start stabbing. So pretty sure that's the same thing. It's more chaotic. Of course, and street fights will always be like that. You're not gonna see like this patterned fighter expression of both, because how do you develop a strategy? You study patterns and then you intercept it in some way, or you completely stop it in order to impose your own things, or you let it flow in a particular direction so you can attack it from the blind side or whatever. Like there's many strategies. So fighters, they have a certain pattern, while street fights and warfare can be very chaotic, and that's where the problem lies. So this idea is it new? No, but in the sports context and what's happening, also not very new. If you look at old Valley Tudo fights of Carlson Gracie and whatever, you will see very good takedowns. You will see a lot of good strikes. You will see good ground and pound from the 50s, even before. So no, even the 30s, where you had who was it? Uh, Omori was also fighting Gracie. So no, I think, yeah, sure, he made it more worldwide, and now with the pool of talent evolving, of course, any game will evolve. But is it new idea? Absolutely not. Now go back even further. You have all these Kenjutsu schools and Jukenjutsu with the big rifle, or the Tankenjutsu. So you go in with the short sword, or I go in with a big rifle and a bayonet on it. It's obviously wood, and we're wearing those armors. You and me, we have these different formats. We clash until someone loses the weapon, or we get super close. Then we grapple. In the past, they said they would even remove the helmet, and they strangle each other, they pin, or they keep with the weapon if they have it. So they strike, grapple, standing up, take down, finish. So I mean, the sequence has always been there.
Why do you feel it's important to study history and know about all of this stuff? And where do you feel like it can help people in today's modern world?
You study history so you don't spend your entire lifetime in a hamster wheel. That one. Our day martial art doesn't spend its for generation worth of time in a hamster wheel, and so you can actually evolve it. And two, you study it because it's just like anything. It involves a lot of things. It involves human values. It involves now human culture, like from set this period, this place on earth, or that place, or this country. You just you study it because you want to push things further, and also if you learn a particular truth about a particular time, that really makes you reflect on yourself now. Am I actually going forward with things, or am I still stuck, or have I actually, evolved? And, just to actually weigh in where you are now, that's also very important. A lot of people think that history is just, knowing what happened back then. No, you have a lot to reflect on at the same time. For example, now the whole world, what's happening now and the chaos, a lot of us are reflecting like, look at back then. We thought we we moved on from this, or you think, we stopped doing, this or that, but apparently no, or um, and here, for example, that's a good way to reflect and see, hey, have we evolved as a society? No. Or as a martial art, or as a culture, whatever it may be. So you see, this is the very important part. And also just maintaining things. Imagine now there is no books, or there is no extensive, judo book from 1892, let's say. Like, even a lot of Japanese people don't know, like, either from a linguistic perspective, because Meiji Japanese is different than today's Japanese, and also just how rich, like how good the guys that pioneered their judo today they were, in order to tell you that, hey, no, this is actually what you guys had prior to this ridiculous claim. So really about learning truth, reflecting on yourself now, and also where you want to go next.
Yeah, I want to end on just kind of what you said there at the end, that these folks that came before us were really, really good. I mean, if you're telling me that you're going to take some white, let's say you have a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu who's very well versed in De La Riva guard and lapel guard and spider guard, or, fancy stuff, I guess you might say. And hypothetically, if you put that person against a samurai warrior from back in the day and they were going to have a grappling match, I bet that samurai warrior would do pretty damn good. Honestly, like, I bet that he would give that blue belt some trouble. So if you think that we're somehow better than the people that came before us, I think that you'd be in for a rude surprise. I think that if anything, the people that came before us were a lot tougher, very innovative, and they're a lot more resourceful. And from my perspective, they're a lot healthier and a lot more holistic. Like, they seem to have a much more range of skills than we have today in our modern world, where we can order whatever we want on our phones and it just shows up. But back in the day, our ancestors knew how to plant and fish and hunt and fight and shoot weapons and use swords and all this other stuff that has just been forgotten, right? And it's been lost to some degree. What do you think we can do to kind of bring some of that stuff back and use martial arts like judo to kind of experience this, almost a returning home to what a human being is capable of being?
I'd like to comment on the word resourceful. I think now we have too many good things that we cannot imagine that they did particular tasks without using this tool or that tool. For example, there are people out there, you see the videos, like a very nice, polished, very smooth stone or marble they did for their palaces or their graveyards, and people will say, look at how, like, at the finesse and the finishing of that stone, and they had to have tools that, or no, there's no way they did that, there's aliens or whatever. No, they were very resourceful. They used other means to get to that, because you just cannot imagine uh, being without that particular tool. Like, now a lot of people will be crippled without internet. I'm sure you remember a time in your life without the internet, right? Same for me. So
Oh yeah, for sure.
sometimes you can just, like, imagine now 20 years from now, how did they get that package without, ordering online or something? They have no idea how sophisticated the posting service was in 1910 or 1920s. The guys in the trenches in World War One, the stuff they would get in the mail was amazing, or whatever, like telegram or the phone, like the phone wiring, or they were far more resourceful than you would think. Sure, technology didn't help them, but because they were restricted in many ways, they got creative in order to combat that. And uh, it just, now, like, a lot of people would just immediately either throw it away or take it to the dry cleaner. I have blood on my gi or on my cotton shirts or whatever. You just use some bicarbonate and vinegar, and that thing will be out of your shirt or your gi. And these are things that they used back then. So we cannot imagine without, like, a big plastic bottle full of chemicals. And no, you need to be very resourceful. There's a lot of hacks you can do. There's people dedicated to really teaching those old methods that are very, like, now we call them hacks, but back then it was just a normal thing to do. I remember my grandmother would wash a lot of like oil stains and stuff from with olive oil soap or whatever. Now people will just dry clean or throw it away or whatever. So I think martial art will teach you that, hey, on the mats there's no phone, there is no technology. Now you're in trouble. Try to get out of it now. I think that mentality that we develop in the grappling context can make you very resourceful outside, and that's the keyword, resourceful.
That's so well said, man. Chadi, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I know we got to wrap this up, but before we do, can you tell us a little bit more about your channel? Tell us about the new book. Tell us when all this stuff is coming out, and where can people learn some more?
Okay, sure. My channel is self-titled Chadi, and the book, I'm not sure when it's coming out. I'm having it proofread. It's not going to come out in just one language. That's why it's taking a little bit of time, and also making sure I don't make any translation errors because that's very important. So there's just a lot of obstacles, but once I've overcome them, it's actually a very good thing for the, intellectually for me, but also as a service for the martial arts community worldwide.
Do you have time to talk a little more about that, or do you gotta get running?
No, I'm actually okay. It's called The Origins and History of Judo.
Okay.
It is by Ryohei Uchida. Ryohei Uchida was not the most stand-up-ish guy because he was a very ultra-conservative and also an expansionist and like what do you call today, a neocon or a neo-hawk or whatever. But at the time, and it's at the time, this type of nationalistic sentiment was very normal. So again, I'm not condoning who he was, or if I translate his work, it doesn't mean that I align with his values. Obviously not, because A, he was not Kodokan Judoka, nor was he close to Kano. But I do feel that his arguments and what he did present and how he argued his points was very well put. And it doesn't hurt to study the minds of any period in time. Like now, if you find some hidden untranslated works of Genghis Khan, like I'm sure people would be lining up to translate them and understanding what they were. Now Genghis Khan, he was an expansionist. He had mountains of skulls and bones of people. Now we look at it like, wow, what a Chad or whatever. But how is that better than the maniacs of the 20th century, right? But I'm sure if something came up, we would love to learn about it. So what the Ryohei Uchida said about judo, I think it holds some value and it should be studied. So translating it and making it available to today's generation, Japanese and Westerners, I'm sure it could be nothing but a favor.
Well, I'm super excited to check it out when it comes out, man. And if you want, we can do another episode to promote the launch when it's all done. And man, love having you on the show, Chadi. Anytime, you're welcome. And I really appreciate you, man.
Thank you too, Paul. It was a very pleasant talk. I really appreciate it. Thank you again.